Tanking in hardcore is terrifying. One bad pull and you could be saying goodbye to hundreds of hours of hard-earned progress. So I can't really blame people when they avoid tanking the way I avoid my vegetables, cause let's be honest, it is a huge responsibility. You can carry a bad DPS or even tolerate a bad healer, but a bad tank, that gets people killed. When I first started playing hardcore, you couldn't pay me 10 WoW tokens to play tank. My first tune was a mage, then a hunter, rogue, and every DPS class known to Azeroth. It just felt safer and less stressful, you know? But when Doomhowl came out, I tried rolling a warrior and let me tell you, tanking has been the most fun, rewarding, and addicting experience I've ever had in my entire life. Once you understand the fundamentals, it's actually easier than relying on some random tank to do the job for you. You get to control the pace, the flow of the dungeon, and even decide on the comp when forming your groups. And while Classic WoW is mostly a solved game already, there's a couple of nuances to tanking that many veterans rarely talk about. And if you're new to tanking, I applaud you for doing so. To become better at your role, here's what you want to know. Alright, first things first, threat is king. Look, I don't care how much armor you have or how much HP you stack, if you can't hold threat, you're not tanking at all. Threat is basically mobs' way of deciding who they hate the most, and the one with the most threat is who they'll be attacking. That person has to be you. Remember this, whenever your DPS deals damage, they generate threat. Whenever a healer heals you, they generate healing aggro, aka threat. As a tank, your biggest job is to be on top of the threat table and make all enemies attack you. That's why I strongly recommend that you grab a threat monitoring add-on like Threat Classic 2 or Tiny Threat. That brings us to my next point. More damage equals more threat. Oh my, like if you think I've mentioned threat so many times now. Well, it's just that threat is the bread and butter of tanking in Classic. As a tank, the more damage you do, the more threat you generate to hold aggro. I'm obviously not asking you to top the damage meters every single time. That's just simply impossible with a rogue, hunter, or mage in your team. What I mean to say is, you'll want to deal the most damage on your opener. This way you can establish aggro right off the bat before any of your DPS has any chance of ripping it off. And since I'm making this guide from a warrior's perspective, I might as well drop what my opener looked like while leveling as arms. So first I charge in, cast sweeping strikes, do one auto attack, into whirlwind, into berserker's rage, then demo shout into defensive stance macro, and then cleave or sunder armor depending on what my party needs. Please note almost all of my buttons are macroed to make this possible. I strongly recommend you get plater nameplates to let you know whether you're losing aggro on a mob. Next is proper positioning. Seriously, I've seen way too many tanks backpedal enemies into their hunter's dead zone, body pull extra packs, LOS their healers, or get yeeted off ledges by a knockback. Don't be that tank. My advice is to simply be aware. Try asking yourself these questions. Would charging into this mob social aggro the next pack? If the boss performs a certain mechanic, will it compromise my position? Should I stand my ground here so the mobs will get hit by our mage's Flame Strike plus Blizzard combo? You know, just think proactively instead of simply reacting to what is happening. Some more general tips to improve your positioning would be to 1. Face mobs away from your group to avoid cleave mechanics. 2. Tank bosses against a wall to avoid getting knocked back. 3. Backpedal to prevent pulling a nearby pack or avoid incoming patrols. Now, that brings us to my next tip. Take advantage of line of sight or LOS. You may have already heard about this, but I can emphasize enough how LOS pools is such a game changer. It's very useful whether you're in RFC or any late game dungeon. How it works is instead of running in, you use the terrain to force casters to move to you. For our newbies out there, do this by simply hitting the mob with a ranged weapon and hide behind a solid wall or obstacle. Casters won't be able to cast and will eventually have to walk up to you. You can also do this by running away as far as possible so you get out of their spell casting range. Watch your healer's mana. This might sound too obvious, but so many tanks don't pay attention to their healer. All they know is zugzag. Oops. Before you say I'm pointing fingers, I know this because I'm guilty of this sometimes. You're screwed when your healer runs out of mana, so you better give them time to breathe. Take a look at this older run I had on my priest, for example. He's barely letting me fill up my mana, bro. He's lucky I was on my A game that day and was able to keep up. Anyway, learn to gauge if your healer needs a drink after a pull. Some healers will take offense if you don't, which could lead to some unfortunate misunderstandings and raveling later on. Also, learn to use your defensive cooldowns when things get tight. If your healer is struggling, pop a shield, retaliate, use a target dummy or a health path, just anything to ease the pressure. Okay, now that you know how to respect your healer, let's talk about chain pulling. As the name suggests, this is when you start range pulling another mob or pack right before the current one dies. I use this all the time, especially in Scarlet Monastery Cathedral where mobs are spread out one by one. Just make sure you've got enough aggro on the current mob before pulling another. This is pretty useful if you want the dungeon to end faster, cause think about it. The less time you spend inside the dungeon, the safer it gets, right? But of course, again, I want to emphasize this. Watch your healer's mana and gauge the capability of your team to take on another fight. A good tank knows how to maximize resources, so another useful tip that goes hand in hand with chain pulling is carrying over enough rage to handle the next pack. So please, for the love of Hillsbrad, when a mob is at 50% HP, stop spamming Sunders when you've got twice the amount of threat already. If you already have a solid hold of the current mob, stop spending your rage and start pulling it for the next pull. Gosh, did I just rephrase everything that I just said? I'm so sorry. Don't worry, we're almost done. Alright, marking your enemies is standard tanking protocol, especially in Classic. This helps your DPS focus on a target correctly, CCs happen smoothly, and you don't lose threat on random mobs. To mark a target, right-click on its portrait and choose a symbol from the menu. Some people use a macro to make things faster, but I just use the marker from my party frame add-on IRF. Anyway, here's a quick rundown of standard target markers. So skull means skill first. This is the priority target for DPS and who you, as the tank, should dump threat early on. Then X means skill next. So after skull dies, your team should focus on X. We also got Moon for sheep, meaning mages should polymorph this target. Don't break it. Then we have Square for sap. Rogues need to use sap on this before the pull. It's also a good habit to mark patrols just so you know where they are on the map. Alright, for my last tip, be a leader. This might sound controversial, but I don't understand DPS players who form groups in order to tank around unless the tank is new and specifically asked to be guided. Because no matter how we look at it, the tank is inherently the leader of the group, and a good tank sets the pace, calls the shots, and keeps everyone on the same page. Even though WoW Classic has been around for 2 decades, there's still plenty of new players who might not know every mechanic or strategy in the game. So be the voice of reason that they need. Communicate with your team, warn them about important mechanics before they become a problem later on. Mark your targets because a well-marked pool keeps DPS focused and prevents chaos. Also, it's important that you acknowledge good plays. If a rogue uses distract to help with a pool, or a mage saves the group with a clutch polymorph, let them know they did great. A little encouragement goes a long way. And with these tips in mind, go out there and be the best tank you can be. I hope you've learned something in this video, and if you found it helpful, please leave a comment or maybe a sweet little subscribe. We're so close to getting 100 subs, guys. Let's go! See you on the next one, Zaffers.